The sound you're hearing right now is iconic. The twin rotors making that sound are mounted on one of the most iconic aircraft to ever take to the skies. The first proper utility helicopter and the last chopper out of Saigon. Today we take a deep dive into the UH-1, or as you probably know it, the Huey. This video is sponsored by World of Tanks. It's a massive online PC multiplayer experience that's accessible to everyone, especially because it's free. Join the global community of over 100 million players and play it your way, with over 800 tanks, each with different strengths and weaknesses. Whether you prefer tank destroyers, artillery, light, medium or heavy tanks, there's a tank out there to match your playstyle if it's close range brawling, reconnaissance or sniping from afar across 40 different battle arenas. You and your team will have to work together to win the battle, which could be over open fields, in the mountains, across vast deserts, or in the cramped city streets. The authentic tank models and vehicle characteristics make you feel like a real tank commander, and sometimes even a real tank mechanic, as you modify, upgrade and customize your vehicles to create a steel beast ready for any challenge. And you can download World of Tanks now for free using the link in the description below. During registration, use the code COMBAT to get, for free, 7 days premium access, 250,000 credits, the Tier 6 premium tank Cromwell B, and 3 rental tanks for 10 battles each, Tiger 131, T-78 and the Type 64. Again, click the link in the description to try World of Tanks today, but for now, helicopters. In every war since the beginning of time, military commanders have had to wrestle with two issues: how to get troops and materiel into the fight, and how to get wounded soldiers out of it. The first battlefield ambulances had appeared as early as the 18th century, with the French flying ambulances that used the same carriages as the horse-drawn flying artillery, or artillerie volante, to get wounded men off the battlefield. This method, with the addition of a piston engine around a century later, would remain the status quo, until Korea, where the flying ambulance became a reality. The Korean War would see the first battlefield use of helicopters, with vehicles like the Sikorsky H-5 and H-19, the Hiller OH-23, and the iconic Bell H-13 providing new solutions to medical evacuations, pilot rescues, and resupply missions. These early helicopters were tiny, slow, noisy and unreliable, but they proved that the helicopter had a place on the modern battlefield. But at this point, nobody had any idea how important this new vehicle was going to become. In 1954, the US Army would launch a design competition for a new utility and medevac helicopter. The specification called for a vehicle that could move a payload of 360 kilograms for a distance of at least 365 kilometers, cruising at a speed of 184 kilometers per hour at a service ceiling of 1800 meters. Many thought this completely impossible, and it certainly looked that way, but the pioneers over at Bell Helicopters thought otherwise. Bell had gained the Army's trust thanks to the hugely successful Bell 47, an already iconic vehicle and one that had saved many lives in Korea. But its tiny 200 horsepower piston engine was extremely limiting. Larger designs like the Sikorsky H-19 were more capable, but the heavy radial engine mounted awkwardly in the nose of the H-19 limited its mobility, and a new approach would be needed. Bell found no real advantage of using piston engines, and for the new design, they wanted to use a gas turbine. It was the jet age after all. Luckily for them, the Army had been funding their own turbine power plant, the 700 horsepower Lycoming XT-53, the brainchild of German engineer Dr. Anselm Franz, the man who had been behind the UMO-004 engines that powered many of the aircraft from my German jet video. Bell and Lycoming would work together to adapt this engine for helicopter use, using the basic structure of the Bell 47 in a larger, fully enclosed design, with the lightweight engine and gearbox mounted just below the rotor. This design would end up winning the Army contract, with 3 prototypes of the vehicle ordered in June 1955. Bell called it the Model 204, while the Army knew it as the XH-40. The new aircraft was a simple, tidy design. Unlike the H-19, the pilots and passengers were all on the same level, and the helo was easy to get in and out of thanks to the low floor and large cabin doors. Testing in October 1956 found no major problems with the design, and after a 6-vehicle service batch was completed, 9 pre-production aircraft were ordered. Originally, the Bell 204 was going to be the H-40, but the Army had revised their designation system, and the new helicopter was known instead as the HU-1 Iroquois. In reality, nobody called the HU-1 the Iroquois. The HU, standing for Helicopter Utility, gave rise to a far superior and completely unofficial nickname, the Huey. The first Hueys were delivered to the Army in June 1959, with Bell Helicopter and the US Army still unaware that they had just created one of the most iconic vehicles of history. The HU-1A was not the Huey we all know and love, however, and work was already underway on the first of many variants. The Army was concerned that the A model wouldn't have the power to handle hot and high conditions, and a more powerful engine was requested. The HU-1B, first flying in early 1960, would use either the 960 horsepower T-53L5 or the 1100 horsepower T-53L11, and would have a stretched fuselage, able to carry either 7 troops, or 3 stretchers, 2 sitting casualties and a medic, or nearly 1.4 tons of cargo. With the introduction of the HU-1B, some in the Army were beginning to understand the potential that the vehicle had, namely a General Hamilton Howze, the Director of Army Aviation. He was incredibly excited about the idea of moving vast amounts of infantry around a battlefield using these new helicopters, and in 1961 headed the Tactical Mobility Requirements Board, which was formed to test new theories of warfare. The Army created the 11th Air Assault Division specifically to test Howze's theories, and trials began of this new Helicopter Mobile Infantry Division. The 11th did have some glaring disadvantages. Its mobility on the ground was poor, it was vulnerable to armoured assaults, and operations could be easily hampered by bad weather. However, the advantages couldn't be ignored. Blisteringly fast tempo and reaction times, long range capability, high flexibility, and the ability to concentrate forces at key points to rapidly achieve their objectives. These trials showed that the 11th Air Assault Division could easily find their opposition and then quickly bring in all the firepower and supplies necessary to destroy him before the enemy could react. The Huey helicopter and these successful tests would fundamentally change how the Army was planning to deploy and resupply its infantry from this point on, and on the 1st of July 1965, the 11th Air Assault Division, along with elements of the 10th Air Transport Brigade and the 2nd Infantry, would combine to form the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. Less than a month later, 1st Cav would be sent overseas, to join the fighting in the dense jungles of Vietnam. But this was not the Huey's first experience of combat, nor of Vietnam. In fact, 3 years earlier, in March 1962, the first Hueys, now using the designation UH-1A, were deployed to the country as part of the 57th Medical Detachment, flying medevac missions for the South Vietnamese long before the US had begun any sort of official involvement. Over the next few years, as the American presence increased, UH-1Bs were deployed as transport aircraft and would soon be ferrying US Army troops into combat, with many airframes being modified to carry rockets, machine guns and grenade launchers. The Army had already begun to develop tactics for the dense jungle landing zones in-country. As the troop-laden transport helicopters approached the LZ, special gunship aircraft would swoop down, spraying the tree line with rockets and machine gun fire. Transports would then touch down, unloading their troops into the tall grass and taking off again within seconds, while their onboard door gunners would spray their M60 machine guns for cover. Suddenly, thanks to the Huey, Army commanders could deploy entire battalions deep within enemy territory in just a few minutes. By 1965, when the first cavalry arrived on the scene, there were almost 200,000 American troops stationed in Vietnam, and the division, along with its 400 UH-1 helicopters, would soon begin to encounter and engage large numbers of Viet Cong, as well as North Vietnamese Army regulars. Many predicted that the Americans, most of whom were drafted, would perform incredibly poorly against the North Vietnamese, a nation who had been fighting for decades. First the Japanese, then the French, then the South, and now the US. However, Hanoi didn't have the Huey helicopter, and they had not, unlike the Americans, spent the last 10 years devising a new type of helicopter mobile warfare. Despite their elaborate intelligence networks, the NVA could never quite predict the Americans' movements, or when the next troop-laden Hueys would swoop down to deploy hundreds of well-equipped Army infantrymen. The arrival of the UH-1C in September 1965 only made things even easier from the Army. The C-model Hueys were more powerful and more manoeuvrable, and had been designed specifically to be used as gunships, bristling with 2.75-inch rockets, 40mm grenade launchers, 7.62mm M60 light machine guns, or even M21 miniguns. The B model, now the standard in Vietnam, would be used for troop transport, while the C model would support in the gunship role. The first big test for the Air Cav would come in the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley in late 1965, where American troops were deployed into the valley at two landing zones, LZ's X-Ray and Albany, and would be forced to defend these drop zones after coming under attack from a huge number of North Vietnamese troops. Using helicopter, fixed wing and artillery support, the Americans were able to hold the landing zones and drive away the oncoming North Vietnamese, but both sides took a large number of casualties and both claimed victory. The battles of Ia Drang proved to be a blueprint for both sides' tactics moving forward. The Americans would use their extreme mobility and overwhelming firepower to attempt to seize their objectives in seek and destroy missions. The Vietnamese, meanwhile, would counter this by attacking the Americans before they could deploy this firepower. PAVN Colonel Huey said to his troops attacking LZ Albany, "Move inside the column, grab them by the belt, and thus avoid casualties from the artillery and air." The Americans would logically be a lot less confident calling in airstrikes on their own positions after all. Ia Drang would also see the first large-scale deployment of a new Huey helicopter, the UH-1D. The D model was significantly larger, capable of carrying 12 troops or up to 6 stretcher cases, soon becoming the Army's primary combat transport and medevac aircraft in Vietnam, while UH-1B and C vehicles would be used as the gunship role. The longer UH-1D and UH-1H Hueys can be identified from the fact that they have 2 windows in their stretched side doors, rather than a single, larger window of the A, B and C models. Colloquially, the troop transports would be known as slicks, due to the lack of weapons on the sides of the helicopters. The armed Hueys would be the gunships, and the medevac choppers would be known as Dustoffs, in honour of the radio call sign of Major Charles Kelly, commander of the original US Army Medical Evacuation Unit in Vietnam. Dustoff Hueys would accomplish just under 30,000 medical evacuations in 1969 alone, saving countless lives. In World War II, 29% of all wounded US soldiers died. In Korea, this fell slightly to 26%. The widespread use of medevac helicopters in Vietnam would see this plummet to only 19%. In total, 400,000 people were transported by Dustoff Hueys in Vietnam, with pilots flying dangerous missions into hot LZs, willing to drop directly into a firefight in an attempt to save lives. The Huey would be instrumental in trying to deal with the massive Tet Offensive of 1968, allowing the US to quickly evacuate, support and redeploy its forces to inflict massive casualties on the Vietnamese. Tet also saw the introduction of the first dedicated attack helicopter, the AH-1G Huey Cobra, which was based very closely off the Huey while being faster, more manoeuvrable and carrying more firepower. The Hueys themselves were relatively resilient, being able to take a significant amount of hits from small arms fire, up to and including 12.7mm machine gun rounds, and still staying airborne. That being said, the crew inside were vulnerable, with the thin aluminium plating providing little to no protection. The pilots at least had some armour plate beneath them, but anyone in the back was encouraged to sit on their helmet if they wanted any chance of stopping an enemy round. By the 1970s, the US had started a withdrawal from Vietnam, which is good timing for Huey pilots as the NVA had started to introduce Soviet-made man-portable surface-to-air missile systems like the SA-7 Strela, a weapon that would have been incredibly dangerous to the low-flying helicopters. The South Vietnamese pilots had to immediately devise new tactics to avoid these weapons. When Saigon fell in 1975, Huey helicopters were still the main vehicle for evacuation, flying out to American ships waiting offshore and unloading their cargo before flying back, or sometimes simply being pushed off the deck to make room for more aircraft. The Huey had shaped the Vietnam War, and had proved such a huge influence on how that war was fought by both sides. The Vietnam War, likewise, had shaped the Huey, with the nimble UH-1C, the stretched UH-1D and H, and the sleek AH-1G all arising directly from the conflict. The end of the Vietnam War was in no way the end of the Huey helicopter though. The UH-1H I've mentioned a couple of times was introduced around 1968 and was outwardly identical to the UH-1D but mounted a more powerful engine. By the time the last UH-1H was delivered in 1976, over 5,400 had been produced, making it by far the most numerous variant of the Huey, compared to 2,000 UH-1Ds, 750 UH-1Cs 1,000 UH-1Bs, and less than 200 UH-1As. The Marines had their own Huey, the UH-1E, which had been modified for carrier operations by adding a rescue hoist, a rotor brake, and using anti-corrosive materials. The UH-1F was used by the US Air Force for missile site support duties, as well as the very mysterious UH-1P, which flew classified psychological warfare missions in Vietnam. The Navy would have the HH-1K and UH-1L, both based on the seafaring UH-1E, and used for search and rescue duties as well as training. The UH-1N would be the next major upgrade for the series, with twin gas turbine engines. As early as 1965, Bell had been working on a Model 208, fitting a UH-1D airframe with two T-72 turboshafts on a common gearbox, each rated to over 900 horsepower. Combined, this would have been far too much for the rotor to handle, so each jet was derated down to 765 horsepower. However, if one of these engines failed, the other could be brought back up to 900 horsepower, providing more than enough power to keep the helicopter airborne. These dual-engine Hueys were faster, more capable, and significantly safer, and the UH-1N became the new standard. Production vehicles used Canadian PT-6T turboshafts and would be deployed as early as 1970 with the Air Force, with some seeing some limited action in Vietnam. The twin Huey would see combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, but by this point the airframes were showing their age, and replacements were being looked at. But the Marines decided instead to upgrade the Huey one last time. The UH-1Y was such a big upgrade that it was decided to simply make them as new aircraft, known as the Venom. The Venom uses a 4-blade all-composite rotor system, new engines, is almost half a metre longer, and boasts a digital cockpit with new avionics and electronics. Compared to the N model, the Venom has a larger payload, a greater range, less vibration, and operates at a much higher cruising speed. It's a massive upgrade package, but it was required to keep a nearly 70-year-old design in service today. The AH-1G Huey Cobra, known usually as just the Cobra, is also still in service today as the AH-1Z Viper, and has its own interesting history, including the AH-1J and T Sea Cobras, the AH-1W Super Cobra, and the Bell King Cobra, and I'd love to do a video on those airframes if there's any interest. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this very quick snapshot into the development and service history of one of the most recognisable and influential aircraft of all time, the UH-1 Huey. Thank you again to World of Tanks for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already, do click that link in the description to start playing today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do leave a like and a comment down below, and do subscribe if you want to see some more content. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting the channel, it means a lot. Anyway, I'll see you all in the next one.